The reported number already is far too high. Reported number already is unacceptable. The number of civilian deaths. So of course something higher than that would just be further tragedy. But we long ago passed the stage where this has been a horrific human tragedy for some time.
You're smirking.
Go ahead with another question.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I'm not even going to entertain that. I'm not even going to entertain that. Saeed, go ahead with another question.
Thank you.
It's ridiculous. All right, everyone. Sorry to be late. Better get this show on the road. I know Leon has somewhere to be at 3 o'clock. So he does. You don't know? Today's a semifinal of the Euros, Spain versus France. I believe that Leon's tracking that. I believe that Leon is tracking that very closely.
I tried team handball.
Yeah. Matt, I thought you were much more international than that.
I'm more international when it comes to cricket.
Fair. Fair enough. I don't have anything to start, so.
No? All right. Let's start with NATO and the summit. So the Secretary has had a couple meetings today already. I guess summit hasn't yet kicked off, but will tonight. Are you aware that he has heard any concerns from the people that he's spoken to so far about President Biden?
No, I'm not aware of him having heard any concerns.
Have you
as of yet.
asked, or are you deliberately trying to avoid?
I talked to him an hour ago, and he did not mention having any concerns with anyone.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, did not mention having heard concerns from anyone.
So he has his own concerns.
No, that is not a fair implication. No, obviously not. He has spoken to this quite clearly. Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, does that mean? Do you know if they've come up? Have they come up with?
They have not.
Anyone else?
They have not come up in. Well, I can't speak for anyone else all around the government, obviously, but no, I'm not aware of anyone raising concerns with the secretary or anyone else from the State Department about the president. What we consistently hear from allies and partners around the world when we travel the world and when people come here is that they are grateful for the leadership the president has shown. In this case, when we talk about NATO, in expanding NATO and convincing allies to raise their collective support for NATO's defense and deterrence measures, and his leadership in rallying an international coalition to push back on Russia's aggression in Ukraine, among many other foreign policy measures.
Okay, and then is there any State Department component to the aid package that's supposed to be announced today that you're aware of?
So I don't want to get it. It's a nice way to try to get me into talking about something that has not yet been announced. So, but I, but so, so I will. Let me answer it elliptically. So, elliptically. So there will be new air defense capabilities announced during this summit, both by the United States and by other countries. There will be other new defense commitments announced, and of course, the State Department does play a role in all of those.
Right. Well, other than I think that at this event this morning, he said that something about $7 million in protective gear equipment for Ukrainian women's armed forces. Is there so you're saying that beyond that,
there will be
beyond the U.S. component of that, there will be more from state.
Yeah, we will be announcing across the government. Some of that will include State Department components, political, economic, and military measures to support Ukraine.
Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The 7 million, sorry, apologies. The 7 million secretary said, is it NATO countries? So how much of it is the US?
Let me get details to you offline.
I have another one second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if you have any, if the final communique has been finalized or definitively, the wording that the NATO summit leaders would give to Ukraine on this bridge. You guys call it a bridge to membership. There's talks of some capitals, the Baltic states specifically, they want the word irreversible in the final communique. My understanding that it's been negotiated. Can you say where it stands?
I obviously don't want to say what the final communique will say. There are pieces of the communique that continue to be worked on and negotiated, which is usual for the summit, right? There's a lot that comes in those NATO communiques. You've seen them before, and some of that goes right up to the last minute. I will say that a significant amount of time has gone into discussions about the wording about Ukraine's path to membership. The Secretary talked with President Zelensky directly about this when we were in Ukraine several months ago. It was a significant portion of discussion at the NATO foreign ministers meeting last month that the Secretary attended in Prague. And of course, it has been the subject of ongoing discussions between our building and other NATO members. And of course, Julie Smith, our ambassador to NATO, being in the lead on that over the past few weeks. I will say, I think we have landed in a place, and you will all see this when the language comes forward, that makes clear, as we have said, that that Ukraine's future is in NATO. And the communique will make that very clear, and you'll all get to see the language and talk about it when it's publicly released.
Is it still being negotiated, to your knowledge?
There may be pieces of that part we have largely, I will just say that language we have largely settled on. There are other pieces of the communique, and maybe some smaller pieces of that piece of it that we're still negotiating as well. That part is largely settled, yeah. Say.
Thank you. Can I move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't think you were going to ask me a NATO question when I called on you. So.
I do have my NATO questions, but let's talk about Gaza. Okay. Anyway, are you aware of the Lancet group report? It's a medical magazine, British medical magazine, that estimated the deaths as a result of the war in Gaza to be 186,000. And of course, it's taken into account. The expert took into account indirect deaths, that have happened thus far and may happen as a result of the war, including disease and other things and starvation.
So
I
have seen the report, and I will just say whatever the number of civilians that have actually died as a result of this conflict, we know that it's far too many. Yeah. And far too many civilians have been needlessly killed as a result of this conflict. And that is why we are working so hard, including negotiations that are going on this week, to try to reach a ceasefire that would alleviate the suffering in Gaza, that would bring home the hostages that continue to be held, and ultimately put us on a path to hopefully ending the war.
So are you concerned that, the figures could be far more staggering than what we've seen published by, let's say, the Ministry of Health in Gaza? I mean, I remember early on, the Assistant Secretary of State, Barbara Lee, told one of the committees on Capitol Hill that the deaths may actually be more than what the health ministry has said.
Sure. The death toll could very well be more. We know there are potentially people who are under rubble who have not been counted. But it goes to the point I was making. Whatever the number is, the reported number already is far too high. Reported number already is unacceptable. The number of civilian deaths. So, of course, something higher than that would just be further tragedy. But we long ago passed the stage where this has been a horrific human tragedy for some time. Go ahead with another question. Absolutely not. I'm not even going to entertain that. I'm not even going to entertain that. Saeed, go ahead with another question.
Thank you.
It's ridiculous.
I wanted to ask you about the status of the talks. I know yesterday you said, and Kirby at the White House, your colleague at the White House, said that that you are a bit optimistic, although there are gaps. Are we any closer today? Do you have any assessment as where we are today, and so on? And of course, Hamas is saying that the latest Israeli attack actually may jeopardize ceasefire talks.
So, as I said yesterday, neither want to negotiate in public, nor do I kind of want to offer ongoing daily assessments of where the talks stand. As we said last week, when we got the proposal back from Hamas, we saw room for progress and room for hope that we could reach a ceasefire, and we continue to work hard to pursue a ceasefire because of, as I said, the immense ongoing suffering in Gaza that we want to alleviate, which we know a ceasefire is the best path to accomplishing.
And my last question now, the Israeli Prime Minister is expected to come to the city in 2 weeks and so on. Is it your assessment that he actually would come and speak before Congress if a deal has not been arrived to? What is your assessment of his visit? And will he, let's say, be received at the State Department?
I don't have any independent assessment to offer of whether he'll come or not. All I can tell you is Congress has invited him and he has accepted the invitation. I have no reason to think that he won't come. As to any meetings with the executive branch, I don't have anything to announce today. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Any update on the negotiations with the Hezbollah also?
No, I spoke to this some yesterday. It remains our assessment that the best way to reach calm in the north is to get a ceasefire in Gaza. It's not to say it's the only way. We continue to pursue diplomacy to resolve the conflict in northern Israel and southern Lebanon and to try to de-escalate the conflict and keep tensions from rising further. But that remains a very tough goal as long as the conflict in Gaza continues to wage. And so we do, and you heard the president say this when he outlined the ceasefire proposal several weeks ago, that we believe then, and we continue to believe that the best way to find a path to calm in the north is to first achieve a ceasefire in Gaza. Yeah.
In the region.
Yeah.
It's been over a month since the U.S. detained, it's been over a month since the Houthis detained dozens of UN staff and civil society members, as well as former locally employed staff from the U.S. Embassy in Yemen. Do you have any update on U.S. efforts to secure their release or hold the Houthis accountable for their attacks in the Red Sea?
So first of all, we condemn the Houthis' wrongful detentions and once again call on them to release all detainees, including the United Nations diplomatic and non-governmental organization staff that they detained last month. We will not rest until all detainees are released. I can tell you that the Secretary personally has discussed this matter with partners in the region, with a number of countries, to impress upon everyone that is important that the Houthis release these workers who have nothing to do with the conflict in Gaza. There is no reason that they should have been detained, in the same way that the Houthis' attacks on international shipping have nothing to do with the war in Gaza. So do their detentions of aid workers and others. So I will just say that through these actions, these attacks that the Houthis continue to launch, they are alienating the world community and putting the peace process in Yemen, which parties, including the Houthis, have painstakingly negotiated over the last 2 years, in jeopardy. And so we will continue to impress upon them through all available channels that they should stop their attacks and they should release all of the workers that they are detaining. Simon.
Could we, just staying on, in the region on Gaza, that supposed to be talks in Doha tomorrow. Is there any sort of update from the U.S. side that you can give us on the possibility of a hostage deal? There's been some positive talk last week, but are we any closer to getting a deal?
I kind of answered this to Saeed's question. I don't really want to offer a daily kind of assessment of how the talks are going, other than that we are working on them. A lot of this proposal has been agreed to for some time. When you think about the proposal is maybe not the right word, but when you think about the outstanding issues or the issues that would be encompassed in any kind of ceasefire, a number of them have been essentially agreed on, maybe some fine points to be worked out for some time, and we have been down to, for some time, some of the much harder issues and much stickier issues, and that continues to be the case. We have made progress. We certainly think we're closer to a deal than we were a few weeks ago, but that doesn't mean we'll get one. You've heard the Secretary say before that oftentimes in these types of negotiations, the issues that are saved for the end are the hardest ones, and so even when a deal seems within reach, it doesn't mean you're going to get one. All we can do is continue to make clear that this deal is in the interests of Israel. It's in the interests of the Palestinian people in Gaza. It would alleviate the suffering of the Palestinian people in Gaza, so we hope we're able to come to an agreement as soon as possible.
And we've seen, there's been some reporting that Arab foreign ministers have been invited to the NATO summit. I think there's an Israeli delegation here. Is there anything you can say about who's here, whether the Secretary will meet with them, and also how much that the Gaza situation, the Israel-Palestinian situation, will be part of the talks?
Yeah, so obviously you have NATO members who are in town, and then you have the heads of state of 4 other countries who are partners of NATO. That includes Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and the Republic of Korea. And then there are foreign ministers in town from other NATO countries, Israel, Algeria, Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Mauritania, Morocco, Qatar, Tunisia, and UAE. actually did happen to have the list right here. And yes, the secretary and other members of the government will be meeting with them when they are in town. And yes, I would certainly expect, to your question about the topics, I would certainly expect that the conflict in Gaza will be something that's discussed, and not just the work to achieve a ceasefire, but the ongoing work that we are doing to try and develop robust plans for the day after the conflict, to establish governance and security that would give us a path to lasting peace, security, and stability for the region. And I will note that even while that work is going on here, Barbara Leaf, our assistant secretary, is traveling in the region right now, meeting with counterparts to advance those same lines of effort.
So is there a meeting involving Secretary Blinken and those Middle Eastern foreign ministers, including the Israelis? Is that they're all in one meeting that's going to be discussing that?
I'm not aware of any such meeting. We have several bilats and different meetings, but I'm not aware of one meeting with those foreign partners just focused on Gaza. It may be that there's something as part of the overall summit that they're involved, but I'm not aware of it.
Sorry, just to clarify on that,
Yeah.
when you mentioned a list of non-NATO countries, I think you did say the secretary would be meeting them. But just to clarify,
No, not necessarily with all of them. Secretary and
just
others in the
saying
government.
it's
These
got
are
meetings
these are people
with
who
some-
are invited to be in town that will be participating in different NATO events, some of the side events that go on, and then some of those there will be bilateral meetings that happen here, some at the White House, some at the Defense Department, the usual thing that happens on the margins of these types of summits. There's not one meeting organized around all of them.
Can I just make a nitpicky,
I would expect
correction?
nothing less, Matt.
So these are not all heads of state, right?
No, I said these
In
are
fact,
foreign.
the
I think I
head of-
said foreign ministers. There were four heads
No,
heads of state from four countries.
Yeah, no.
Heads of government. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, the head of, the
Thank
head
you.
of state
Heads
of,
of state, heads of state.
Australia is
Heads
the
of
king.
state and heads of government. I should
And
have.
in fact, the Australian Prime Minister is not coming. It's
I-
his deputy.
I
who's
should have
coming.
said.
And the head of state of
heads of
Japan
state, oh.
is the emperor, not prime minister. So
I-
let's
I appreciate
look,
the correction.
look, you guys exist on protocol.
It is a fair point. I very much take the point.
But just to come back, so there will be bilateral meetings between Secretary or other U.S. officials and those countries where you'll talk about the future of Gaza. That's on the agenda.
I can't say with every one of those countries I listed who have been invited, but yes, with a number of those countries, there'll be meetings going on. Yes, that'll be part of the
And
agenda.
are you hoping for the NATO as a whole to express some view on the conflict in Gaza? You know, particularly, are you expecting, or are you hoping that NATO leaders will endorse a peace deal, hostage for peace?
Let me defer that question until further in the week when we actually have the communique.
Okay.
Yeah, Kyle.
I know you don't want to get into, a full assessment as to the ongoing talks for a ceasefire, but I do wonder if you could just help us understand how this moment is different than it has been in the past a little bit. It was about a month ago that Blinken said in the region that some of the changes that Hamas had put forth are workable and some are not. Is that still the case, or has that changed?
I really don't want to get into that in public. Only because
The secretary got into it in public.
That was
I
a
mean-
different time. We're in the middle of some very intense negotiations over this right now. That was when we first received a response back from Hamas that we are characterizing. We are in the middle of some pretty delicate, sensitive negotiations right now about a path forward, and I don't want to say anything that could potentially jeopardize those.
So you can't say, or you're not willing to say, if Hamas has dropped any of its demands that were made about a month ago?
I just don't want to speak to it at all.
Okay.
So we know the U.S. is working for the day after plan in Gaza, and for the NATO summit, Turkish President Erdogan and his delegation, including the foreign minister, will be here in town. Is that something you will discuss with your Turkish counterparts, given Ankara has long pledged to guarantorship in the region, and we hear from the Turkish officials that they are encouraging Hamas to accept the ceasefire proposal, and also right after Joe Biden announced the ceasefire deal, we know Secretary Blinken and Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan held a phone call immediately right after that, so I'd like to hear more on that.
Yes, in fact, we have been discussing the end of the conflict and what comes next with Turkey for some time. You may recall that Secretary Blinken in January traveled to Istanbul to meet with President Erdogan and with the Foreign Minister Fidan, and has had a number of subsequent meetings with the Foreign Minister to talk about both how we get to a ceasefire and how we reach a durable end to the war with robust security, governance, and reconstruction plans for Gaza. So that continues to be a topic that we discuss on any occasions when we meet with our Turkish counterparts.
Should we expect similar meetings on the sidelines of the NATO summit this week between American and Turkish
I
counterparts?
just don't have any meetings to announce here today, as I've said to other people.
This morning on Capitol Hill, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Iran was talking to some lawmakers and giving a congressional briefing about the various massacres in the 1980s, as well as the contemporary status of human rights in Iran. He, as part of his remarks after the event, he spoke a bit about the Biden administration's policy towards Iran, and basically denied or rejected the idea that there is an overarching strategy for Iran that has been laid out by the Biden administration, at least in the UN's view or his view. How do you respond to that? And if, assuming that the president will be returning to the White House next year, can we expect a sort of future of Iran negotiations to be laid out by this administration?
So first of all, I would say everyone is entitled to their opinion, but that obviously is very much one that we would not agree with. If you look at the totality of our policy, we have made clear that we are committed to ensuring that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon. We have worked with our allies and partners around the world to ensure that objective. You have seen us impose over 600 sanctions and export controls on Iran and Iran-related entities to counter Iran's malign influence. You have seen us work with partners in the region through diplomatic measures to try to counter Iran's influence and to take on Iran's support for terrorism. So no, it's not something I would agree with at all.
Gotcha.